What's up guys, Grass back with another video today, another short one. I just wanted to discuss with you guys what I think is the best, I would say the best gaming TV you can buy right now. Obviously with the launch of the PS5, with the launch of the Xbox Series X, with all these new technologies, all these hype words, VRR, variable refresh rate. So I wanted to discuss with you guys what I think is the best TV to buy for the next gaming generation. So without further ado guys, let's take a look at the TV that I think is the #1 choice. So the TV that I have and that I am currently using is, and which I think as well is the best gaming TV, is this LG OLED. So this is the LG OLED, and if you guys can, in particular, if you guys can, the model that I am referring to is the 2020 model. So the LG OLED CX. So the LG OLED CX model, I find is probably the best TV for next generation gaming. I mean, it delivers stunning picture quality and it can produce what you call those perfect blacks. So I'll go in order of some specifications why I think the LG CX is the best TV. The first thing being what's called or what is considered as contrast and local dimming. So what contrast is pretty much what is the difference between your whitest whites and your blackest blacks. And this, I think, is probably one of the biggest factors to consider when purchasing a TV, especially for next gen with HDR, so high dynamic range, and VRR. So what's nice about OLED is that it has what's called infinite contrast ratio. Why? Because every individual pixel on this TV is able to turn on and off. And the fact that the TV can turn on and off, that every individual pixel can turn on and off, that's what gives you that huge contrast ratio. So OLED TVs are known for that. If you guys are not sure about what OLED stands for, so OLED stands for organic light emitting diode. And some TV manufacturers have been coming out with this technology as well, but from my understanding, LG supplies these panels to companies like Panasonic and Sony. So definitely that's a huge one. And the fact that these Samsung TVs, the pixels can turn on and off to give you that infinite contrast ratio, well, that also means that it has incredible local dimming. So what local dimming is let's say there's an area that is brighter. The typical TV manufacturers that use, let's say, LCD panels in the back, or LED panels in the back, sorry, will light those specific areas. Versus you can almost consider that an OLED TV has over 8 million local dimming zones since every single pixel is able to light and turn off. So contrast ratio is a huge factor. That definitely goes to OLED TVs. You get that infinite contrast ratio because your pixels can turn on and off individually. So that is amazing, especially for HDR. For HDR, that is a huge importance so that the developer, is able to display exactly how he wants the image to be. There's some highlights of that image where he wanted it to be darker. There's some highlights that he wanted it to be brighter. And using HDR with OLED always gives you the best image. Another thing to consider is viewing angle. So what viewing angle means is pretty much the color accuracy when you view, let's say, the TV from the side. So there's different types of panels. You have an OLED panel. You also have what's called a VA panel, so a vertical alignment panel. And you also have what's called an IPS panel, so in-plane switching. So typically from the side, IPS panels are better. VA, vertical alignment panels, are better from the front. What's nice about OLED is that you get the best of both worlds. So if you're looking straight on, or if you're looking at the TV from the side, a OLED TV will keep its color accuracy, which is awesome. The next thing is something called the wide color gamut. So this is pretty much it's the number of colors that a TV can display. And this TV has excellent color gamut. I mean, there's different types of color coverage, one of them being the DCI P3 color space, which it's almost perfect in this type of coverage, especially with HDR content. So it's awesome. I mean, the white color gamut is amazing. And when I'm like, you guys have to understand is that when I'm talking about white color gamut, I'm also talking about like, we are considering like billions of colors that are being displayed. And you guys can see right now, I am running, this is Doom Eternal. You guys can see how vibrant the colors are. I mean, it's just amazing. Next thing to consider, why an OLED is my top pick, is that you want to look also at something called the response time. So the response time is pretty much when you have, let's say, a fast moving image, you wanna have that image being crisp without getting what's called motion blur. So obviously the quicker the response time, well, guess what? The better the less noticeable motion blur will be. And what's nice about the CX model, so the 2020 OLED CX model has a 120 hertz refresh rate. So it does help noticeably when it comes to motion blur, right? So those fast moving images. The next thing is input lag. So what input lag is pretty much is the delay between what, let's say, your Xbox Series X or your Series S or what your PS5 is displaying to your TV, and what's going to be the actual on-screen reaction. So why is this important? Well, this is important obviously for video games. This is important as well if you're running a PC on your screen. You always obviously want to have as little input lag as. And what's really, really nice about OLED screens, especially the CX model, is that the CX model for 2020 has in 4K 60 FPS, because I mean, let's be honest, that's typically going to be where most of the games are going to be running at 4K 60 FPS. So games at 4K 60 FPS on this TV is going to have approximately 13.6 of input lag, which is amazing. The next point, which is probably one of the most important, is something called VRR. So VRR stands for variable refresh rate. So VRR is now currently available on the Xbox Series S, and it's also available on the on the Xbox Series X and S. The PlayStation 5 still does not have the VRR enabled. I am sure eventually it will come out. It will be something that will be available on the PS5. But currently right now, if you're talking about gaming consoles, Xbox Series X and S do have that. The PS5 unfortunately does not. And pretty much what VRR is how effective the TV's flickering capabilities are. So the way I like to see VRR is, let's say your Xbox Series X is outputting 50 frames per second, okay? And your TV right now is taking in 60 frames per second. So there's obviously a discrepancy with what the TV's refresh rate is and what your Xbox Series X or Xbox Series S is displaying, right? So it's not matching. The refresh rate of the TV and the frames per second that your Series X or X are displaying are not matching. And when that happens, you get what's called either flicker, or you can get what's called screen tearing, and it's quite noticeable when you're playing video games. So the nice thing about VRR is really, VRR, which there's really two, right? It depends if it's like AMD or if it's AMD or if it's NVIDIA. You're going to see things like if it's NVIDIA, it's something called G-Sync. So G-Sync is the compatible NVIDIA graphic cards. So again, VRR, it's really nice because it gets to sync up exactly the refresh rate or how many frames per second your console is outputting, and your TV is going to automatically adjust. If your console is outputting, let's say 55 frames per second, while your TV is going to adjust and also output 55 frames per second to not have that screen tearing, which is really, really nice. And the thing about 2020 OLED CX is that it also has HDMI 2.1. So the fact of having HDMI 2.1 gives the TV the capabilities to get 120 hertz as well, refresh rate. So obviously not all games are going to be running at 120 hertz. There's a limited amount of games right now. I mean, you can play Ori and the Will and the Wisp on the Series X in 4K running at 120 frames per second. You can also play games like Dirt 5 running at 120 frames per second. And I believe the new Call of Duty game, Cold War as well, is going to be able to run at 120. So that's really cool. It's nice to see that a TV has VRR, variable refresh rate, as well as the CX does support 120 hertz refresh rate. So if you guys want to get that crisp gaming experience, obviously the consoles need to be compatible with certain games that can output that. That would be pretty impressive. The last thing I want to discuss, guys, is that, yeah, so this TV is amazing. Why doesn't everybody buy an OLED? Well, there's two downsides. There's obviously cons to this. There's two things, pretty much. One is permanent burn-in risk. So yes, this TV can suffer permanent burn-in risk. And guess what? My TV already has some permanent burn-in risk, which is not ideal, especially when it's a new TV. And I typically burn-in is not something that the company will pass under warranty. So what burn-in is pretty much the risk of developing persistent image retention. So pretty much you have like something that's a static image that just burned into your screen and it's always there. So all OLEDs suffer from this. And again, there are some things that the screens do come with, such as like screen shift that changes the pixel orientation every now and then to help with burn-in risk. But look, I'm an example of it. This TV, which sucks. I mean, that for me is the only like major downfall. You guys have to be careful with your static images not to get burn-in. But unfortunately, I suffered from it. So I'm just letting you guys know that yes, although they say that it's really hard to get burn-in, no, it's not. I find that if you're not careful, after, you know, maybe a couple weeks and months of playing that, especially on a static image. But if not gaming, but maybe you're using it for TV like Netflix or watching the news where you have those static images, you can get eventual burn-in risk. So be aware of that. The other thing that I want to discuss, I would say con, is the price. So obviously OLED TVs are fairly expensive. They're not cheap, right? They're not cheap TVs. It's not as cheap as just buying your regular OLEDs. So there is that factor as well, as to look at, you know, budget-wise, what it's looking at. So keep in mind that the OLED TVs come in, let's say, 4 major sizes. You can either get it in 48 inches, in 55 inches, in 65 inches, and in 77 inches. When it comes to the value per inch, there's 2 models you guys should really be looking at. Either a 55 inch or a 65 inch. The 48-inch TVs are almost just as expensive as the 55-inch TVs. Why? Or actually, sometimes the 55-inch are actually cheaper. Why? Because that form factor, so the way these TV manufacturers work is that they like cut these panels off like this giant glass. And based on the size of the TV, they're able to get more panels per glass. And the 55-inch and the 65-inch TVs maximize that glass as much as possible. So there's less waste, which is why the 55 or the 65-inch TVs make more sense, let's say for value-wise, for price-wise, versus either getting a 48-inch or a 77-inch. The 48-inch, like I said, is actually sometimes more expensive than the 55-inch, and the 77-inch is just crazy. Like they're extremely expensive. They haven't dropped in price. Well, they have been dropping in price every year, but not enough to justify the purchase. So if you are looking at an OLED, really consider those 2 sizes, either the 55-inch or the 65. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's my video today. I just wanted to go over why I felt these TVs are the best. Again, just to remind you, you know, like the LG CX is an exceptional TV for playing video games, low input lag, VRR, instant response time. I mean, it has, like I said, VRR, so things like G-Sync and FreeSync. So FreeSync is obviously the AMD version of G-Sync for NVIDIA to reduce screen tearing. But again, you guys have to be careful, like burn-in, and these TVs are relatively expensive. So that's the video today, guys. I hope you find some value. I would really, really like a sub just to help grow the channel. And that's it. So like, subscribe, leave some comments, hit the notification bell. Let's start a conversation. If you guys have some ideas of other videos you would like to see on my channel, let me know. As always, have yourself a great day, have yourself a great night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.